to this computer. Okay, so water rights. All right, so we're going to start this conversation about with the basics. So first of all, when you are talking about water rights, we're literally talking about who has rights to the water on a property. The reason that this is becoming an increasingly big issue in Texas is because people are starting to get preview to the fact of living on a homestead. That's really the biggest thing of it. So if you've ever met a client or if you've been to my house is a great example. I live on a farm. Well, there are people around me, like when it rains, they collect that water and they use it to water their grass. They use it to feed their livestock instead of actually pulling from the water line like I do. And my irrigation is coming from the city's water. They collect the water from the rain. And they're like, well, it landed on my land. I have rights to it. But in real life, the answer is no, you don't. And some people, they sell land with wells on that property. They sell land with aquifers being really close to their property and things like that. And people don't realize that they have access to water or they do realize they have access to water and they think they can just do what they want with it, and they 110% cannot. So, what we have done on the Trek side, I'm going to share my screen here first. What we've done on the Trek side is when we sell a property now, we have a seller's disclosure notice for groundwater and surface water rights. This is a new document, which is why the entire thing is blue. There are no red lines, meaning this is not a document that we've had before. This is a brand new thing. So when people had water rights discussions in previous contracts, previous to today or 2 weeks ago when all these documents came out, they just kind of discussed it maybe in paragraph 11, or another attorney would draw up an addendum or something like that. Instead, now Trek is saying we need to have documentation on this and we need to be on the same page statewide on how we're going to deal with our water rights. Now, I want you to think of the water rights exactly the same way as you would think of mineral rights. It's the exact same thing. When you are discussing property ownership, there are two different parts to this. Okay, so now we're on the diagram that I've shared with you. There are two different parts to this. Who owns the stuff on the surface and who owns the stuff underneath? Okay. That's what we are talking about when people sell property. A lot of people understand that, oh, lots of Texans typically sell or keep their mineral rights, right? Mineral rights is everything underneath. The cool thing about water is that water can be underneath and it can also be on top. Who has the rights to what? What kind of permits are required? Who can do whatever they want to do with it? That's where that disclosure comes in. If someone has documented water rights, and then if they don't have documented water rights, but there is water, then that new buyer needs to understand what rights they have. We are not supposed to, on the real estate side, I say this a lot when I've taught the classes in the past. We need to be able to speak the language of water rights, but you are not going to be a water right expert by the end of this 30 minutes. You're just not. And I do not need you to be. You need to understand why these are even discussions. You need to understand the difference between groundwater and surface water, diffused water. You might need to understand who is in charge of what, which you are and are not allowed to do, kind of thing. But as far as telling somebody truly what rights you have, we are not attorneys. Nashawn is an attorney. She's on the call. But the rest of us, we are not attorneys. So we do not speak that attorney language. We just need to be able to speak the very basics of it. We need to know how to say water, restroom, and food in this language, but we don't need to have a full-blown conversation about water rights. Okay. Yes, Drell. Drell, your hand is up. Okay. All right. So when you have, you can interrupt me at any point, but whenever you want to say something. Okay. So, no, we can't hear you. I see you're texting now. No, we can't hear you. Okay, so when we have your water rights, so you have two options here, okay? When in Texas specifically, water is once the water hits the ground, okay, there's 9 aquifers all over Texas, major aquifers, okay, and I'm actually going to show you where they are on this page here. This is the other thing that I showed you. This map is showing you where the major aquifers are, okay? So if you live anywhere near a major aquifer, or if you live by ponds or lakes and things like that, and people are wanting to dig a well, or they want to have, underwater access of any kind for whatever reason. It could be for their own personal use at their home. It could be for livestock. It could be for commercial use. It could be for investment use. It could be for a whole bunch of different things. When that comes to pass, if the water is underground, it's going into one of these aquifers, these major aquifers, and those aquifers are ran by specific people. Okay. The aquifers and who's actually in charge of this stuff for the groundwater, that's going to be the GCD. This is where I'm seeing this at right here. The Groundwater Conservation District. Okay. When you have groundwater is going to be the water that's actually underground. Okay, so we're not talking about the rainwater, we're not talking about storms, we're not talking about any water that's on the surface. We're talking about the water underground. Again, these are where the people are saying, I want to dig a well here. I want to, if you have a lot of people will buy land in crazy big floodplains because they want a pond by their house. They'll build up one section of the land really, really high up, and then they'll have earth movers come in and dig for ponds because as soon as it rains and you're like, dang, like who just built this big old 10-mile pond or whatever it is? And then literally it takes one drop of rain and it's full immediately. You're like, well, did they use a water hose? That's because the water is sitting underground. And as soon as it rains, it just accumulates and it just puddles, and there's your pond. That's where a lot of the man-made lakes came from. Is where a lot of the man-made ponds and all those things come from, is because they're finding the areas where there's a ton of groundwater. So as they dig, the water is already seeping in, and then as it rains, it fills in the top, and then there's your pond. Okay. So that water is regulated by a group of people. Like that's somebody's job is to regulate the water under the ground. That water is regulated by the Groundwater Conservation District. Okay. And again, most of that water is held in those 9 aquifers, and that's where people are applying for permits to get a well. They apply for permits to use that water for whatever the purposes may be, but they cannot, nobody can buy land, have access to the water, and just dig a well and just say, okay, I'm going to dig a well here. I own this 10 acres. I own all of the stuff under and above. Not necessarily. Okay. You cannot tap into that water underground 100% on your own. Not when there's an aquifer or a ton of water under you. Now, who owns the actual water under there? Who owns the groundwater? The landowner actually owns it. Okay, the landowner does own this. Okay, it's privately owned. Now, again, this is where it gets tricky though. Yes, you own it, but just like even a residential thing, I own the 20 acres that I live on, but I still have to get a permit to build here, right? I couldn't just build whatever I want, and I can't even put whatever hay out here I want. I got to clear it with the county to make sure I still get my ag exemption. It's mine, but I still got to get permission from somebody. Okay. Yes, Drill.
Hello?
Ah, we can hear you now.
Okay, there we go. There we go. Okay, so I'm gonna just get past the first question I had. The question I'm having right now, so where it says owned by the landowner, privately owned, but it's regulated by the Groundwater Conservation District. Would that make it kind of like the green box that's like on the corner of like some people's houses and neighborhoods? Would it kind of be like that then, where it's like
Like an
it's on your
easement,
land, but it's like for everybody?
like your easement, like an easement kind of thing?
Uh, I'm trying to think because it was like a green box in front of my house as a child, but I knew it was like a bunch of electrical stuff in it.
Right. So that's a transformer. For the
Hmm.
transformer to be on the property, your parents or whoever owned that subdivision, they had to sign over an easement to put the transformer there.
Ah, okay,
Okay,
okay.
so that's a little bit different. So yes, that is actually it's it's kind yeah, it's different. So the transformer that you're talking about that's on the property is not owned by your parents. It's owned by the electric company. This water is owned by the
Mhm.
landowner.
Yeah,
That
like
groundwater conservation district are just regulating how much of the groundwater you have access to. They're regulating how much groundwater you can use over a certain amount of time. Do you guys all remember back in the day when it was getting so hot and the city started regulating how often we watered our grass? It's our
yes.
grass. It was our water. It's our water bill. Why are you telling me how much I can? That's the same type of idea from the groundwater conservation district. They are regulating how much water is actually being used underground for this particular residence. Okay, great question. Great question. Now with the groundwaters, okay, so the other thing about groundwaters is people typically need some type of written permit document, something that says, yes, you could put a well here. Now, here's where things get out of hand, and this is why they had to start regulating this stuff. So let's just say, let me get the map. Let's just say we all lived. Mm-mm-mm. Okay, because these are all the major aquifers, right? So let's just say we lived over here. This was just all 23 of us lived right here in this bubble. And every single one of us had 2 acres. And I we did our our water rights call, and then every single one of us said if we all put together 5 grand, every single one of us can get a well on our property. And then somebody got greedy and was like, well, why do I just want one well? The world is literally ending in 2028 because I read an article. I want as much water as possible. I don't want to have to go to the grocery store. So I'm going to get 2 wells. And then I'm going to get a filtration system. And then maybe I'm going to divide my property and get a third well. Do you guys see how this could be a problem? These aquifers are holding the water underground for the entire state of Texas. So when lakes, ponds, the coastal area where the water is rushing up and it gets on the land and it goes underground, the water funnels its way throughout the entire state into these aquifers, and this is where the state says, we can now say there's water here, and we can try to regulate it for everybody to make sure we all have enough water. So no, you can't put 5 wells on your property just because there's an aquifer up under you. There's a regulation. So when you have a client that's trying to specifically buy land and they want water rights, these are not mineral rights, very similar to mineral rights, but it's anything underneath the ground. They're not talking about oil, gas, and stuff all the time. Sometimes those minerals that they're looking for, they want water rights. Okay, that's going to be your groundwater. Now, surface water is going to trip y'all out. Surface water is a mix of a few things. Okay, so surface water is literally the water on top of the surface. So we'll start with the subcategory here because this is what people know the most, and that's going to be diffused water. So diffused water is going to be the water that literally it's coming from drainage. Some people have creeks, in their on their properties, and if it rains, the water is hitting the creek and it's coming through their property, and then they go in their backyard and they just get a big old bucket of it and they boil it and they get all the dirt out of it, and then they're like, oh, I got a nice gallon of water. No, you can't do that. The people where the water is raining on top of their house and they try to capture it and they, distribute it between their livestock and things like that. Any type of storm water, surface runoff, drainage water, anything that's literally water because of some type of like weather alkylate, I guess. That is called diffused water. Okay. That water is owned by the landowner until it hits a natural waterway. So a natural waterway would be that creek that runs into the pond. It would be the creek that runs into the lake, Lake Ray Hubbard. It would be if there is an actual pond by your house and then your water drains there, or if you have flooding anywhere. So like not my property, but like three properties over, if it rains there, you might as well just go put on a swimsuit and just go deep diving. Like it just we live on top. Everybody else like on like further down, they live well lower than us. So when that water hits that ground, it runs into um the little creeks that the county builds, and they're called culverts, and then the water runs together, runs into the culvert, and then it funnels its way. That's a waterway. It's a natural waterway. It's something that we've created to gather the water as it runs off. The moment the water touches a waterway, it's no longer owned by the landowner. It's no longer owned by the landowner. The moment that the water hits the ground and actually becomes groundwater, then now it's the property of the GCD, right? The groundwater conservation district. But with diffused water, a lot of people they will take that water that comes off their roof, it'll run down their gutter system, and then it'll fill up these huge tubes. You see this like deep in the country. They fill up these huge tubes. They clean the water and they reuse it. That's the water that they use for their house. Like they don't even have water lines, they don't have anything. They have like from the city, they funnel the water that rains on top of them and it pushes their irrigation system. It does all this and that. The problem with that, if you're using it for irrigation for the land, or if you're using it for commercial property, you will have to get a permit for that. The state actually owns surface water. The state of Texas owns it. Different group of people than the groundwater conservation district because they want the water underground. These people, the moment that rain touches the ground, they want access to it. So there's been tons and tons and tons of lawsuits for people who are in the deep country that collect that water and they're using it to live. They're using it to live off of. People have been sued. People have had restraining orders against water. Like it is insane because that water belongs to the state. Who came up with these rules? I don't know. I just know it wasn't me. Okay, like I'm just telling you what it all means. But I did not come up with this. But just know that they don't have rights to the water just because it rained on your property. That's not your water. It belongs to the state of Texas. Okay. If you're going to use the water for livestock use, that's totally different. For whatever reason, Texas is totally fine. Um, yeah, they're trying to accommodate the water shortage. Now, Texas is totally fine with you taking that same rainwater and feeding it to the cows. They're totally good with that. But you take that same water and you go take a bath with it instead of paying a water bill, then they have a problem with that. Okay. So when you have clients that are trying to purchase property that has ponds on it, wells on it, groundwater, surface water, anything like that, or if you are purchasing a farm and ranch property that has a filtration system built for diffused water, that's where these conversations come in. And that's when you have to use this disclosure. Okay, so now I'm going to run into this a little bit. So, what you're basically saying, the only reason why you're bringing this document into conversation is if there is any type of groundwater or surface water rights transferring from the previous owner to the new owner. If it's your seller transferring rights or if it's your buyer receiving the rights, that's what this is talking about. Now, on the 1 to 4 family contract in paragraph 2, it talks about mineral rights. Water rights are considered a form of a mineral rights because mineral rights are also under the underground, right? So we have groundwater that is a form of a mineral right. So we have to have now a written disclosure that says at this property, yes, we have one of the following: groundwater district, surface water rights, or water well. Something along this line is happening in this document, in our transaction. If the rights from any of these 5 things are being transferred from one place to the next or not being transferred, I need to use this document. Okay. Now, obviously, though, you guys see the word draft here. Okay. The documents are not live yet. They are up. They're up for us to review in conversations like this, but they are not live yet. Once that June date gets released and this is a real document, you will see it pop up in your zip forms, and I will remind you at that time to make sure you add it to your template so that it's there and ready for you, okay? Now, these are just yes or no questions. Is the water, is any part of this property or any portion of the property in a groundwater district? How do you know? It's that map that I just showed you there. The total of wells known, the number of wells known that are currently in use, because you could have two wells on your property, but one not being used. And these are literally just yes or no questions. This is not one of those documents where you really, again, you need to know the definition of things, or you need to really be like, I'm a water right expert. You don't. You just need to know the difference between groundwater and surface water and what the basic individual rights are. And then the yes and no questions that you have here, you should be able to help your client use. Now, I'm going to say this too. Please understand if you have a question and you do not know the answer, and I don't know the answer, which is a possibility, right? Because it's a new document, but let's just say I don't know the answer. You can always, always, always default to that client, which I highly recommend you do. This is a time I think you should consult an attorney. Right? I love it because it's their job. They wrote it, they can help us decipher what it means. So if you have a client that does not quite understand what they're signing on this, you can explain it to the basic level that you can without saying this is what you should or should not do. This is just what it says. You answer accordingly. At that point, if they still do not understand, defer them to an attorney. If they need an attorney, we have one in our brokerage right here, Nishan Mitchell, and you can also ask me for a contact if you want someone that doesn't work for us already. I can send you that referral as well. But either way, default to an attorney if you have any questions on this document. As far as again, what a buyer should or shouldn't do or what rights they have, if you don't feel comfortable with that, tell them to ask their attorney. Okay. But either way, I just wanted to make sure we had this conversation because this is new. Now, are there other things that have changed with the contracts and everything recently? Yes, about 59 pages worth. But this is the only thing that's new. Everything else, they just put it in a new spot. They reworded it a little bit, but this is the only thing that's completely brand spanking new. Okay. Yes, Drill.
So in the area of oh my bad, in the surrounding area around Prairie View, there are a lot of farmers. My main concern or question is in the event that the area that you live in, there is zero water. Like Prairie View has no water at all. They're landlocked. How do I go about just breaking down and understanding that there is something completely different that they cannot like because in my mind, like since there is no water, this technically can't apply to them regardless, right? Like this is like out the question.
I mean, yes and no. Peer reviews in Houston. Houston is surrounded by a ton of water. So you actually might have a lot of groundwater there.
Because the thing is, Prairie View isn't in the same county as Houston, so it's like in a neighboring county, and
Hmm.
so that county kind of is also landlocked because there is no water there. But there are
So,
man-made ponds and like I think there's a man-made lake nearby, but I'm not sure. But we have no water, so I don't know how that works.
well, they have no water that you're looking at on the surface.
Right, right.
Because they
If there's a pond anywhere near you, the water is coming from underground. That's how it stays full.
because there was another broker and then there
Hmm.
was another staff member who was like over student housing that I had talked to this year because I was supposed to do something with student housing or something, and they basically told me that I couldn't do anything because we have no water. Like there's zero water, so they can't fix anything from infrastructure to like building more housing, like how the students have been asking. So like there's nothing that like can kind of be done. So like what in the event that that is the case, like how do I
So,
explain that?
so again, groundwater is regulated by these people right here. What you're talking about is people who need access to surface water. In
Mm,
Houston, because Houston is a walking floodplain, there's water underground everywhere in Houston, everywhere. Again, here's the map. Here's the map.
Yeah,
Houston's over
yeah.
here. Houston's right here along this coast. These are all the different aquifers. So the Gulf Coast aquifer, look how big this is. Houston's in here. And
So,
so is your school. It's underground. So if you had a farmer that had a well on their property, or if you had a farmer that was leasing their property to the GCD, because they're taking water from under their ground, that's when this would come up. But if someone is just buying property, they have no idea if they have any water rights, they don't know if there's any groundwater, then you don't have anything to worry about. These are specifically for the contracts where you go look at the property and you see an active well or an inactive well sitting there. Or you're looking at
mm,
water hoses and you're like, it ain't hooked up to nothing. Where's that water coming from? It's coming out of the ground. If you see a pump on a property that's pumping water from underground, that's groundwater. Houston is full of it. All of
okay.
Houston is full of it. Your school has groundwater. Your school can't touch it because it's not
Right.
something that the state can regulate. They have to get permission from the GDC to touch that water. They can't
Okay, that
touch
makes sense. 'Cause I've been trying to figure out how
it.
to explain that to other students because we're kind of at a point now where we're trying to protest for more housing because a lot of people are having to be forced to be moved off campus.
Mm-hmm.
So
Because
a
there's
lot
not
of people
enough
were trying to
water
ask me
going
like,
through the plants and stuff. Yeah, they can't touch that water. That's not their water to touch.
Yeah, that's a
It would have to be surface water that they could get their hands on, and it would have to be used. This is what your school would need. They would need permits
mm,
for commercial use, and they would have to collect the surface water. They can't touch the groundwater.
okay,
And the
yes.
state could easily just say, no, you can't have that surface water. We need it to get underground.
They probably
mm,
have said that, especially since it's the HBCU. They probably have said that.
mm,
And so, but the other thing to remember is like, yeah, I wouldn't say there is no water, we have no water. What Jasmine is saying is that if you look at that picture again, there's water under the entire state.
Correct.
Um, And so maybe, Jasmine, the next thing to do is to develop some best practices for the agents. And it might be to just say, like, if you're the buyer's agent, say, hey, um, do we have any reason to think that water rights are implicated? That might just be the question we want to ask, just so we know whether or not we need this form, because it's not always obvious. And sometimes, if you don't know what you're looking for, like you just gave some good examples of, like, are we seeing hoses and they're not hooked up to anything? Are we seeing water wells? Like a maybe a one-page cheat sheet on, since this is new and you don't want to mess this up, because like the statement like, where we have no water. No, there's water everywhere, but it's because it's becoming rare and it's becoming an issue. Like there's cases at the Supreme Court, the United States Supreme Court, where states are fighting over water. And so I don't know, kind of like if you're the buyer's agent, say, hey, do we have any reason to think? Because sometimes people they move out because they want wells and they want, that deep. And so it's like, do we think there's any reason that water rights are implicated? Because sometimes, to be honest, the client will know more about it than we will, you know. And so, and then if you're the seller's agent, just say, hey, do you anticipate water rights being a factor in in this listing? And then we'll know kind of where to go from there. But whatever Jasmine thinks on that.
So that's the whole point of this document, right? So this is not an addendum. This is a seller's
Right.
disclosure. Just like the seller has to disclose if their microwave works, how old is the roof? The seller is disclosing if there are groundwater or surface water rights. So you don't need a cheat sheet because it's going to be in the MLS.
Oh,
If there's water rights to give or to take from someone, it's going to be a
oh,
part of the MLS now. It is a document that the sellers have to disclose on. It is a document that the listing agent, if you have a client that says, hey, I do have groundwater, blah, 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 because this is now something that you're sending them. Just like we send the property disclosure notice, we're sending this, just send it with them. And they will tell you, oh, I don't have any groundwater or surface water rights that they know of. Now, here's this though. I know plenty of people who sell land or I've known plenty of people in the past who have sold land and they say, oh, yeah, I can sell my mineral rights. And they had no idea that there was oil under that land. If they don't know, then they just don't know. The contract is written in such a way that the buyer automatically receives all rights, the surface, the groundwater, mineral, they receive all the rights. The only time that the seller gets to keep any rights, whether it's water rights or mineral rights or anything, is if they sign the additional disclosure that says, I'm going to keep these when you buy. But the original contract states already that the buyer is going to receive the rights. This specific document that is being added to our list of do's and don'ts, this is for the seller to fill out. This is not for your buyer to fill out. This is not a negotiable contract document. This is the buyer saying, these are my water rights, and the seller saying, I understand, I'm going to accept these. That's what this is. Again, just like a property disclosure, this is just a separate disclosure for the water.